And thank you very much for having me. And congratulations to all the team at Video Week for organising this event in lockdown and keeping us all up to date with everything that's going on in this very fast changing area. I'm Joanna Burton and I lead strategy at ID5, which is a universal identity company addressing the problems of advertising in environments where third-party cookies are blocked, both now and in the future. I joined ID5 to help publishers and broadcasters create sustainable revenues from advertising. And personally, I spend a lot of time speaking with publishers and with advertisers all around the world about this topic. At ID5, we want advertising to work for all parties, and we think it's essential to put the consumer, the viewer, the listener, the reader first, and to build a new privacy by design identity infrastructure. Being privacy first is really the only way to have a sustainable industry. And in order to provide brands with better targeting capabilities and campaign measurement and management abilities, and also to enable publishers to optimize their revenue so that they can continue to produce great content and educate and inform us all. So what is this conference all about? Well, identity is at the very foundation of digital advertising. What we're really talking about here is the ability to identify each user individually and treat them all individually, to see what they interact with and to understand their behavior. And identifying each user individually enables advertising messages to be individualized to the right message, right person, right time, hypothesis, as well as managing the frequency of campaigns and also measuring the performance of campaigns. And certainly a topic that has had a lot of column inches in the last couple of years, but how do we know this is important? How can we assess the value of user identification? Well, we can look at how much publishers suffer when identification is taken away. As this chart shows here, about half the value is lost, about $50 billion, if there is no identification. So we can conclude that identification is core as it supports the very promise of digital advertising for brands and content for consumers and monetization for publishers. And when I speak with publishers or ad tech industry leaders, they estimate that publishers and broadcasters are missing out on at least 50% of the revenue that they would be able to make if they could identify the individual viewers. This stat from Amber at Magnite relates to both video and display advertising. Publishers are losing money while the walled gardens have an undeniable advantage over the rest of us. They have a wealth of data about each individual user of their products, from what they're searching for to what they share on social, all the way through. And thereby, they're able to capture the vast majority of advertising dollars. Meanwhile, ad tech platforms need to synchronize user IDs with each other to create a common reference and to share user level information. And third-party cookies can be used to do this on websites, but this creates many technical challenges. For example, cookie matching represents a distribution of personal data which doesn't comply with the current regulations around the world. There's also a risk of data leakage, as user data can be accessed by companies who have no business relationship with that publisher. There can also be issues with page latency, as more than 100 pixels can be called simultaneously when a user visits a web page. And overall, it's a lost opportunity for web publishers to monetize their assets and for advertisers to reach their audiences. And it gets worse with each additional platform the ad tech companies need to synchronize with. In addition to this, the regulation landscape has changed significantly over the past few years, with legislation such as the GDPR, CCPA, the LGPD. GDPR is like we would say, the gold standard of privacy regulation. And it has paved the way for a lot of review around the world and for expected changes in places like Virginia, Florida, New York, and Oklahoma. In addition to that, browsers such as Safari and Firefox have blocked websites from reading and writing third-party cookies. And then January last year, we had the bombshell from Google, who announced that their Chrome browser will stop supporting third-party cookies within 2 years. So that's presumably at some point before January of next year, just a few months away. And what does this mean? What happens when browsers like Firefox and Safari block access to third-party cookies? Well, the analysis of online behavior of users across websites and the targeted delivery of adverts to those users, right place, right message, requires the IDs, which today are stored on third-party cookies. And managing the number of times a given message is shown to a user across websites is done by counting the third-party cookie-based user IDs exposed to the ad. And then connecting conversions with ads, being able to understand the attribution, requires the collection of consistent user IDs at every touch point between the brand and its audience. Without third-party cookies, user-level attribution and funnel analysis is currently impossible. This has led to many advertisers and their agencies optimizing away from users using Safari and Firefox and ensuring their campaigns don't waste any advertising budget trying to reach this effectively, essentially very valuable audience. Effectively, the current identification process based on third-party cookies will soon be obsolete. And we think it's time for the advertising industry to develop a whole new identification process. There are basically two options. In an effort to alleviate privacy concern and scrutiny from the regulators, and to prevent individual user information being shared within the ecosystem, some initiatives have focused on local data processing. Based on the federated learning approach, this method is mostly supported and promoted by Google's Chrome browser in the form of its Privacy Sandbox initiative. Various ideas have been proposed in the sandbox by some of the smartest brains in ad tech at the leading companies, sharing different ideas and different proposals, all with an avian theme. But then just a couple of weeks ago, Google announced it would be going all in on its federated learning of cohorts FLoC solution, which uses data aggregation techniques within the Chrome web browser. Google added they would not support alternative identifiers to track individuals across the web and use them in their own products after the demise of third-party cookies. And they said this should all be supported by first-party consented data, automation, and machine learning, highlighting the importance of first-party data and the importance of building relationships with consumers. Although in principle, this seems useful from a privacy standpoint, as no user-level data would leave the device, this approach presents several challenges and raises significant concerns for publishers, for advertisers, and for independent ad tech, the rest of ad tech. Will a cohort-based approach to targeting and attribution be as efficient as the current user-based solutions, for example? Will it be competitive with the user-based solutions that will remain available within the walls of the walled gardens? Will ad tech vendors and their clients be able to build any competitive advantage if they all use a common and aggregated data set? What happens if each of the browsers builds their own rules and their own features to qualify users and to measure campaign performance? And if publishers, brands, and their technology partners become even more dependent on a handful of dominant players, who will define the rules of user qualification, of targeting, and performance measurement? The second path is that of shared identity solutions, which offer a far more efficient and privacy compliant alternative to third-party cookies. Shared IDs are pseudonymous device identifiers based on first-party data that enable identification across the web without the need to synchronize cookies. Shared IDs can be based on two different kinds of identity, two different identifiers. They can be based on declared identifiers, such as email addresses, which can be hashed and then passed along the ad tech value chain and used as a unique identifier by brands to collect information, deliver messages, and measure the performance of campaigns on their audiences, on their target audiences. And we've seen in recent years login alliances emerging across Europe, such as the NetID Foundation in Germany, Pass Media in France, Nonio in Portugal. These facilitate the collection of declared identifiers across several publishers. And by providing a shared login solution for consumers across multiple websites, these initiatives improve user experience whilst facilitating the collection of declared identifiers by publishers. Or we can use inferred identifiers. These are signals which can be processed by algorithms to infer the uniqueness of a user across websites and create a pseudonymous identifier able to power advertising use cases. Because some of these signals are considered personal data, personally identifiable data, such as IP addresses, user consent is required for this identification method to comply with regulations like the GDPR. And both of these options require the broadcaster or the publisher to have a dialogue with their users. However, note of caution, user authentication rates are low, especially in the open web, where less than 5% of traffic is logged in. Anyone who has ever run a data-driven advertising campaign is probably all too familiar with this issue. As an industry, we need to combine both of these methods of identity, not just rely on either declared or inferred. We need an inclusive method to identify users, one which works for all types of publishers and all types of content, including publishers that cannot command a login. And critically, we need an identity infrastructure that can rise to the privacy and data protection challenges that broadcasters, publishers, and brands are all facing now in their relationship with their consumers. This conference brings together the two most exciting elements of digital advertising right now, identity and connected TV. Over the past few years, we've all witnessed the growth of over-the-top viewing, live and catch-up viewing. This past year saw really significant growth with people, myself included, binge watching more digitally delivered TV than ever before while staying at home. There was also a really significant rise in online sports viewing, as you might expect, live and library content. And we've seen continued growth in online video gaming. These graphs from eMarketer show the growth in connected TV ad spend in the US, as well as its predicted continued growth and the overall growth of time spent with digital media over the past couple of years. In the US, time spent with connected TV increased by nearly 39% in 2020. And there was also a growth in subscription OTT usage, SVOD, where no advertising is present. Time spent with smartphones also increased substantially last year, climbing by 16.6% in the US, and that's without any commuting. Connected television is very often targeted to households rather than to individuals, compared with desktop and mobile video. Many viewers authenticate when they log in to watch on connected TV, but at the moment, there are several different identification systems used for login on either an app or on a website or on a device, connected TV device. And then there's different systems again to link the subsequent visits to an advertiser's website or to the advertiser's CRM and other systems. Consent is also more complicated. We need individual consent, not just household consent, before showing a targeted advert. And we need to identify the individuals to manage the reach and frequency of the campaign with precision. The measurement landscape is also more complex. It's hard to calculate unique deduplicated reach across linear TV and digitally delivered TV, with methodologies varying, and that's whilst we still have third-party cookies, but pretty much all the measurement companies acknowledge that identity is fundamental to address this problem. And it's a similar story with ad-funded video gaming. This sector has experienced high growth during the pandemic, but it can be reliant on mobile ad IDs, which are set to change following the announcement by Apple. Given all of the changes I've summarized today, it's unsurprising that we have seen a significant shift towards shared IDs over the past year, especially in the past 6 months. We've seen that at ID5. And this has happened around the world, led by the supply side, I'd say, with many publishers and broadcasters testing and deploying universal ID. And we'd expect to see continued growth as the advertising industry prepares for the deprecation of third-party cookies in Chrome at some point before next January. Here are some of the publishers around the world that have really leaned into this issue, deploying and rolling out universal ID. For shared IDs to be truly universal, we need a global solution that works for broadcasters and publishers and advertisers, as well as consumers around the world, on all devices and all formats. I hope that was a useful summary of the opportunity we have as an industry to reshape digital advertising with a privacy-first approach to universal identity. Thank you again for having me, and I look forward to your questions.